Good morning and welcome to the October Pacific Northwest Drought Early Warning System Drought and Climate Outlook Webinar. Thank you to those that have joined us previously and those joining us for the first time. My name is Megan Dalton and I'm with the Pacific Northwest Climate Impacts Research Consortium, or CIRC. This bi-monthly webinar series is hosted by NIDIS and CIRC and the Northwest Climate Hub. It is designed to provide stakeholders in the Pacific Northwest with timely drought and climate information. Each webinar is tailored to reflect recent, current, and forecasted conditions and climatic events, and also includes discussions of observed impacts and other relevant updates from across the region. Just a note, this webinar is being recorded, and a recording of this webinar, along with other supporting materials, will be posted on drought.gov later this week. And just a note as well, after the webinar today, there will be an opportunity to provide feedback that will help us improve the series. So please take a moment to tell us what you think. Okay, so after the introductions, today's speakers include Philip Moat, the Director of the Oregon Climate Service at Oregon State University. He will present the climate recapping current conditions. Then Dan Collins with NOAA's Climate Prediction Center will present the climate outlook. And then next, Emily York with the Oregon Health Authority will present on the health effects of drought and wildfire in the Northwest. And finally, Chris Ray with the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation will introduce their Smoke Ready Communities program. So if there are questions during the presentations, please use the chat box to ask your questions, and we will address the questions at the end of all four presentations during the Q&A period. So before we move into the presentations, I'd like to briefly highlight the partners that are making this webinar happen. First here, the Pacific Northwest Climate Impacts Research Consortium, or CIRC, is a climate science to climate action team funded by NOAA's Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments Program. CIRC supports communities, policymakers, and resource managers in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Western Montana as they work to adapt to the changing climate. Next is the Northwest Climate Hub. They develop and deliver science-based, region-specific technologies and practical information that will assist agricultural and natural resource managers with climate-informed decision-making. And finally, to highlight NIDIS, I will turn it over to Britt Parker, the Pacific Northwest DEWS Coordinator for the Northwest.
Great, thank you, Megan. Just briefly, NIDIS's mission is to improve the nation's capacity to proactively manage drought-related risks by providing those affected with the best available information and resources to assess the potential for drought and to better prepare for, mitigate, and respond to the effects of drought. We want to improve our understanding of how and why drought affects society, the economy, and the environment, and to improve accessibility, dissemination, and use of early warning information for drought risk management. NIDIS's approach to achieve that goal is to build on the foundation of a national DEWS, or drought early warning system, through the development of regional DEWS, where networks of partners and stakeholders share information and actions that can help communities cope with drought. While the ultimate goal is a national early warning system, we recognize that impacts and early warning information differ across the regions. Each DEWS has many of the same base ingredients: observation and monitoring, predictions and forecasting, planning and preparedness, communication and outreach, and interdisciplinary research, but ultimately have their own flavor to reflect the needs of their regions. The Pacific Northwest DEWS was officially launched in February of 2016, and our strategic plan is available on drought.gov. And before we turn it over to the first speaker, I just want to say, mark your calendars. There will be our December webinar will be on December 17th of this bi-monthly webinar series. We also have 2 in-person meetings coming up to look at the recap of the 2018 water year and the 2019 outlook. So we'll be in Washington, Lacey, Washington, at the Washington Department of Ecology on November 2nd, and in Idaho and Boise at the Washington Group Plaza on November 8th. And those meetings and registration information can be found on the calendar on drought.gov on those dates. Finally, we just want to highlight that to facilitate our early warning system, more precipitation observations are needed, and we encourage you to join COCOROS, the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. This is a unique nonprofit community-based network of volunteers of all ages and backgrounds working together to measure and map precipitation, rain, hail, and snow, as well as condition reporting. Observations by COCOROS observers of precipitation events or the lack thereof are important to capture and improve our understanding of weather. So to become a volunteer, and we'll put these in the chat box, you can contact your state coordinator. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to our first speaker.
Hi, this is Phil Moat. I hope you can see my slide.
We did. It just disappeared.
Okay. All right. So we'll stick with this. Sometimes GoToMeeting doesn't interact well with presentation software. So I'm doing the climate update, and then we'll turn it over to Dan for looking toward the future. So it's been dry in the Northwest, and the last 60 days, most of the Northwest has been at least 30% drier than average. Western Oregon and parts of Eastern Washington have been at least 50% drier than normal in the last 60 days. In the lower right panel, it's also been a little bit cooler than average, and this is dominated by lower lows than normal. And yeah, it's pretty much everywhere in the Northwest a little bit cooler than average the last 60 days. Looking at the last 15 days, this really is the time of year when normally the fall rains would return. We'd be getting roughly weekly or more frequent synoptic storms coming through, and we've really only had one in the last several weeks. So continued dry. The percentiles on the top there, you can see most of Western Oregon and Washington still at least 50% below average. A little bit more in northeastern Oregon and down through the Snake River Plain. On the lower left is the minimum temperature anomalies. On the lower right is the maximum temperature anomalies just for the last 15 days. Considerable texture, so the mountains have tended to have higher than average minimum temperatures. The Willamette Valley and Puget Sound area have had lower than average minimum temperatures. And then east of the mountains, pretty much everywhere slightly cooler than average minimums for the last 2 weeks. And on the right, lower right, is the maximums. So those have been above average in Western Oregon and Western Washington because of the sunny days that have prevailed the last couple of weeks. Soil moisture is quite low, especially in the Oregon Cascades and North Idaho. So most of the plots that I've shown up to now are from the Climate Toolbox, which is a project of CIRC, the Climate Impacts Research Consortium. So these are pretty low percentiles in some places in the bottom 2%, and pretty much below the 20th percentile in most of Western Oregon, Western Washington, a little better in the central part, especially northeastern Oregon and south central Washington. But again, the dry conditions that have prevailed over the last 6 months have not been entirely ameliorated by recent rains. Turning to stream flow data, the Western Washington and Western Oregon continue to be exceptionally low. Most of these dots are red or the kind of maroon color. Red means lowest. 10th percentile is the sort of maroon color. So you see a lot of those colors in Western Oregon and Washington. East of the Cascades, except in North Idaho, most of the flows are in the middle half, so 25th to 75th percentile. So you see a lot of greens there. but interspersed with some that are in the bottom quartile as well. So continued dry. And this is reflected in the drought monitor, where Oregon is still almost entirely in D3 or D4, and that sort of connects through the northern Great Basin down into the exceptional drought in the Four Corners area, which is the deepest drought of the country. Parts of the Idaho Rockies not in drought, but and a little bit of Western Washington, but for the most part, drought continues in the Northwest. So I'll stop there, check my chat window for questions. Just seeing people logging in, so I don't see any questions, so I'll hand it over to Dan.
All right, thanks, Phil. We do have a couple minutes to spare, so if there are any questions to type in the chat box, please go ahead as we're pulling up Dan's presentation. There's a question, why so dry the last few weeks?
Well, I haven't looked into the synoptics, but I assume that there's been a ridge and that the storms are going north into Alaska. I know Alaska's had unusual warmth recently as well.
Okay. And then would you repeat what the website resources were?
climatetoolbox.org.
And then last question, can you translate D3, D4 to severe or extreme?
The convention, I would have to look it up. The conventional D0 is below, drier than average. D0 is abnormally dry, D1 is moderate drought, D2 is severe drought, D3 is extreme drought, and D4 is exceptional drought. So the bright red in Oregon that was about roughly half of the state was D3, and the slightly less red, more orange, is D2, severe drought.
All right. Thanks, Phil. So why don't we move on to Dan's presentation now?
Okay, thank you. And you can see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Is that correct? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to give you a look at the climate outlooks for the upcoming month and season. I can get my presentation to flip. Okay. All right, so just beginning to give us some context, we look at typically for the upcoming seasonal outlook, the state of El Nino or La Niña, and this chart here shows past El Niños and La Niñas, El Niños in red and La Niñas in blue. This shows the departures from normal of temperatures in the Central Pacific Ocean, and when those departures are positive or warmer than normal, then we have El Nino conditions. You can see there in 2015, 2016, we had a very large El Nino with temperature departures 2.5 degrees and more Celsius above normal. And then in the last year, we had a La Niña, and you see the blue there indicating months when we had greater than 0.5 degree Celsius below normal departures for the Central Pacific. And we've emerged from that, and currently we have a neutral state shown in gray where temperatures are near the long-term climate normals. So looking a bit more carefully at the evolution of the temperatures in the equatorial Pacific, this shows that near the top of the plot on the right, the end of 2017 into beginning of 2018, that we had temperatures that were below normal in the eastern Pacific Ocean, and then temperatures that were above normal confined to the western Pacific have moved across the Central Pacific Ocean to the right in this chart, and you can see that there are temperatures pretty much above normal across the entire Pacific Ocean at this point. We monitor particular regions of the Pacific Ocean in order to determine whether we have El Nino or La Nina conditions. And in the lower left, there's shown some boxes labeled Nino 1+2, Nino 4, Nino 3, and Nino 3.4. You can see the values, how they evolved over time in the plot on the right, and you can see the temperatures have warmed, as we saw in the previous graph, across the equatorial Pacific Ocean in all of these regions. Currently, temperatures are nearing about 1 degree above normal Celsius in several key regions, Nino 3, Nino 4, Nino 3.4. So we're approaching about 1 degree above normal in most of the key regions. Looking at a plot of the departures from normal for sea surface temperatures, you can see a broad area of above normal temperatures across the tropical Pacific Ocean. You can see temperatures are between 0.5 degree and as much as 1 degree above normal. This is in Celsius across the equatorial Pacific Ocean currently. To determine the future evolution of the sea surface temperatures, it's important to look at what the subsurface is doing as well. So this is looking at temperatures in the top 300 meters of the ocean and how they've evolved over time. And the plot on the right again shows time from the top to the bottom from late 2017 to the current month, and across from left to right shows the west to east tropical Pacific Ocean. So you can see that where there was below normal temperatures at depths in the eastern Pacific Ocean in late 2017 with the La Nina conditions, that since early 2018 that there have been broad areas of above normal temperatures even at depths in the tropical Pacific Ocean. And since about August of this year, you can see that the temperatures across the tropical Pacific have gone up substantially. This is simply integrating those temperatures across the Pacific Ocean that you saw in the previous plot, and you can see once again that during the last couple months, towards the right side of this plot, the temperatures summed up across the equatorial Pacific Ocean have gone up substantially during that period. So looking at forecasts from various models for the Central Pacific sea surface temperatures departures from normal, you can see in the plot on the right that virtually every model shows that temperatures are expected to rise in the coming months, and we expect that El Nino will develop in sometime in the later part of this year, from October to December. This is the official outlook, which combines all of the model forecasts, and a team of forecasters determines the likelihood of El Nino. And this shows that the probability of El Nino for winter months is between 70 and 75%. We expect the development sometime during the fall or winter months. So in summary, we have what we refer to as an El Nino watch. This is an expectation that current ENSO neutral conditions will give way to an El Nino in the coming months. And the likelihood, as I noted before, for El Nino by winter is between 70 and 75%. So this plays a key role in the climate and drought outlooks going forward in the coming season. For winter, this shows the typical extension of the jet stream across the southern part of the United States during El Nino conditions. This creates likelihood for wetter than normal conditions across the southern U.S., drier to the north, as well as above normal temperatures, particularly in the Pacific Northwest. This shows the November monthly outlook. Areas on the left, it shows the temperature outlook. On the right shows precipitation. Areas in red are an increased chance for above normal temperatures in the outlook, which you can see for November, we expect temperatures are more likely to be above normal than below or near normal. But particularly in the West and in the Pacific Northwest, you can see that the probability of above normal temperatures exceeds 50% in some regions. The image on the right showing the precipitation outlook shows areas in brown where precipitation is more likely to be below normal than it is to be above or near normal. And there's a slight tilt in the probabilities towards below normal in most areas of the Pacific Northwest, except for along coastal regions where there's an equal chance of below or above normal. Looking at the seasonal outlook for the next 3 months, November, December, and January, again, the temperature forecasts in the upper left, you can see that the greatest probability for the 48 states for above normal temperatures is across the Pacific Northwest region, with temperatures, probabilities for above normal temperatures are greater than 50% in much of the region. And once again, for the seasonal outlook, which considers long-term climate trends as well as the El Nino outlook and other climate variability, shows that there is a tilt in the odds towards below normal precipitation for much of the Pacific Northwest region for the November through January 3-month season. The drought outlook relies largely on these temperature and precipitation forecasts. The outlook references the drought monitor that Phil showed earlier. This shows that there is drought in areas of the Pacific Northwest, inland regions of that areas in drought are expected to persist. This is somewhat related to the forecast for above normal temperature and below normal precipitation. More coastal regions of the Pacific Northwest are shown to either improve but still be in drought, or in some cases for the drought to be eliminated. Looking at the fire outlooks, this is for October in the upper left and for November in the lower right. You see that for October, the outlook showed that there was a increased potential for fire in southern areas of Idaho and to the south of that region. As we go forward, largely because of the changes in seasonal climate, we expect that there is no significant difference from normal fire potential in November. So summarizing, this is my summary slide. El Nino is likely to develop in the coming months with a 70 to 75% chance to be in place during the winter. The El Nino is likely to be weak. We don't see formation at this time of a stronger El Nino. Current temperatures are only between 0.5 degree and 1 degree Celsius above normal in the Central Pacific. The impacts to the U.S. may be overshadowed by other drivers of climate variability because this El Nino is weaker than some other El Nino events. The Pacific Northwest is likely to have above normal temperatures in the coming late fall and winter seasons. And there is an increased chance for inland areas of the Pacific Northwest to have below normal precipitation. So drought is likely to persist for the inland regions of the Pacific Northwest and to diminish for coastal regions of the Pacific Northwest. There was above normal fire potential in some areas of the Pacific Northwest, southern Idaho, but this is expected to decrease during fall and winter. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. I don't know if there are any questions.
Thank you, Dan. We do have a couple of minutes to spare, so we do have one question for you. And here it is. We had the blob in 2015, which made it hard to tell if El Nino reached the Northern California current. What should we watch for in 2018, 2019 to see if this El Nino is likely to affect conditions for migrating salmon, for example?
Well, that's a very specific question to I guess, ocean conditions, which I wouldn't know if I have the correct answer for. We would expect, as El Nino conditions develop, as I noted, for that jet stream to extend to the east and into the southwest U.S. I would expect that we would start seeing that in November, December, but we do see variability around El Nino conditions. So I guess the question would be, would we see that circulation pattern persist, or in previous cases, as noted, sometimes we see a variation in the circulation in the previous strong El Nino of 2015, 2016. The jet was more into the Pacific Northwest, and the precipitation pattern was different, and I'm sure the ocean circulation was also affected by that.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So let's move on to our next speaker, Emily York.
Yes, thanks, Megan, and thanks to Britt also for the invitation to present. These webinars are such a great resource. I'm Emily York, and I lead the state of Oregon's Climate and Health Program. We're funded through a cooperative agreement with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, their national climate health program. And today I'm going to give a quick presentation on the health effects of drought and wildfire. And as you all know, health is determined by many factors, more than just those individual factors such as age, gender, genetics. And as much as our individual behavior matters, like what we eat and how much physical exercise we get, there are other social and environmental determinants. And in fact, there's a growing body of research in the field of public health that points to the social and environmental determinants playing a much bigger role in our health than we maybe first thought. Environmental determinants can include our built environment, like access to parks, transportation, healthy food, and also things like clean air, clean water, and a stable climate. I am not able to advance here. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is an animation from the CDC's climate program. It shows how rising temperatures, rising sea levels, more extreme weather events, and increased CO2 levels lead to a whole number of climate impacts like drought, wildfire, heat waves, and that all of these result in increases in public health risk. And in the next several slides, I'm going to zero in on health effects of drought and give you some examples of what we've been seeing here in Oregon in the last summer or two. So how does drought affect our health? Well, one way is through the intensification of heat waves. This is a chart that we're able to create through our syndromic surveillance system, which records all of our emergency department visits that come in across the state and some of our urgent care visits in close to near real time. And so these are like the intake notes that come in of the symptoms that are suffered by those entering into the emergency department rooms. And in these graphs, the yellow and red dots indicate visits that are higher than expected for that time period based on historical data. So what you're looking at here is heat-related illness this past summer. And when we see those spikes, they're no surprise during times of extreme heat events. And this is something that we've seen over the past 3 years that our system has been up and running. Another way that drought affects health can be through our water. And this year, our state's capital, the city of Salem, had a drinking water advisory that ended up being a pretty big deal for that community due to harmful algal bloom. And that whole event has spurred our state to update regulations to require more HAB, or harmful algal bloom, testing for drinking water. More often we see HABs in our recreational waters. And this graph shows our emergency department visits this summer related to recreational exposure to harmful algal bloom. And those red dots indicate that we may be seeing an increase in these kinds of visits. Although this is just one way to look at it, we know that we have very little capacity when it comes to getting out and monitoring and tracking HABs in our water bodies across the state. Drought can also intensify wildfires, as we all know, leading to an increased exposure to smoke, and more smoky, poor air quality days can trigger asthma attacks and worsen other heart and lung diseases, which are some of the leading causes of death in our region. This is a graph from last year during the Eagle Creek fire event, which was near the populated area of the Columbia Gorge and the Portland metro area. And during those poor air quality days, and at the peak, we saw over a 20% increase in asthma-related emergency department visits. And just to give you a sense of how things have changed in the Northwest when it comes to wildfire, from 2000 to 2010, we could expect 10 or few days of air quality that was bad for your health due to wildfires. So really, poor smoky air quality. But now, within the past 5 years, we're averaging more like 20 summer days with poor air quality. Another way that drought can affect our health is through changing the amount and patterns of certain diseases. So vectors like mosquitoes and ticks can move into new areas where maybe there are stagnant water bodies that create new breeding grounds, and also just changes in the ecosystem. Lyme disease is steadily climbing in the Northwest, although our region is still really low incidence compared to states on the East Coast. This graph shows that the last year that we had recorded data for here in Oregon, 2016, we saw our highest number of cases yet. And drought can not only affect our physical health, but it also impacts our mental health, especially for those who maybe live in our more rural areas, are more dependent on the landscape and the climate for their livelihood. This could include farmers, ranchers, fishers, tribal and indigenous people, those who work in our outdoor recreation industries, which is a pretty big deal here in the Northwest. And this added stress and anxiety or income and job loss can have very real health consequences that are often difficult to quantify or sort of attribute or trace back to conditions in the environment like drought. One community that wanted to learn more about how drought was affecting their health is Crook County. Crook County is located in Central Oregon. It's east of Bend. It's a rural county with just one incorporated city of Prineville that has around 10,000 residents. And this is a group of their public health team and a number of different partners that came in to join them last year to do a rapid community assessment where they completed over 170 door-to-door interviews of a random sort of sample of residents across their county. And one of the findings was that 17% of households said that the drought and concern about future droughts affects their peace of mind. So this is just one sort of self-reporting indicator of how drought might be affecting mental health for this community. Some other notable findings from that project: 93% agreed that the drought conditions increased wildfire risks in their community. 65% observed more wildlife in residential areas, and that could be partly due to the fact that wild animals are coming in closer to areas where there might be watering lawns and landscape. 47% observed changes in their landscape, and 41% had concerns about recreational swimming due to swimmer's itch or algae. And although that project gave us a good sense of how one community perceives drought, there's still a lot of challenges with assessing the health effects of drought. As you all know, drought can be slow evolving, can be difficult to define when it begins and ends. There may not be immediate impacts, and often it requires intermediate steps for health outcomes. Some of the health outcomes that we know are characteristic of drought conditions or chronic drought conditions are, more indirect. Also, our surveillance is not really designed to connect those dots between drought and health. and it's often not long enough to really determine discrete health outcomes. Last year, our program published the Oregon Climate and Health Resilience Plan for Oregon's public health system, and so we're in the stage of implementing a lot of the recommended actions, and we have actions happening both at the state and local or county level. And we've had the opportunity to provide some mini grants to 5 local health jurisdictions who many have identified drought as a leading concern for their community. And a handful of them have implemented climate and health interventions in their communities. This is in the Columbia Gorge, where our partner did some drought education and offered free well testing and education around water. And you can find more about these projects and also our statewide assessment and planning on our website. There's also a little bit of information that I pulled for today's presentation found in the CDC's new Drought Resource Guide for Public Health Professionals. And our state is part of the CDC's Climate Ready States and Cities Initiative, which includes, I think, a little over 14 states, 2 cities, and a couple tribes and territories who are joining together. And drought is definitely something that we're trying to learn more about through working from each other. So that concludes my short presentation for today. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity to join the call, and happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you, Emily. Doesn't look like we have any questions at this time, so we'll go ahead and move on to our next speaker, our final speaker, Chris Ray. Chris, it's possible that you might be on mute.
Oh, you're right. I just introduced myself on mute. Thank you. Sorry about that. Anyway, yeah, I work for the, I am the Air Quality Program for the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, North Central Washington, 1.4 million acre reservation here. And we know smoke will happen, so why not plan for it? All these pictures show wildfire smoke on the reservation, and that's our leading cause of air pollution. It's by orders of magnitude compared to all other sources, but that's just part of being smoke ready. We get smoke from local fires. Usually they can be big or small. We get regional smoke from fires, usually multiple fires, or if they're really big fires, just one fire will also put a lot of smoke in the area. And then there's western smoke, where there's multiple huge fires in the western United States, mostly in Oregon, Northern California, Idaho, and Washington, and it all tends to mingle right over us sometimes or in our area. So it's a multiple source, large fires. And then this year we also ended up with smoke from Siberia, which put us into the unhealthy for sensitive groups category for the AQI for a little while, and then followed that by smoke from British Columbia. So we're looking at a lot of sources of wildfire smoke in different configurations. But smoke ready doesn't only include just wildfire smoke. It's a community-based strategy to look at all sources of smoke. That includes industry, wood smoke, backyard burning, yard debris type smoke, and any other kind of smoke that comes up in your area. So we want to look at our yearly exposure to help prevent health problems of the population and our community members. And to do this, we're looking at a lot of education and outreach material to give people, just to make them more aware of the air quality in our area and what the mitigation actions to become smoke ready are to help them keep their health, keep people healthy. And to do this, we also do a lot of communications and work with partners. So the data, we've seen some of this before. This is our 24-hour averages from an OMAC Washington monitor. for 2017, and you can see the major smoke time is between July and October, and these are all wildfire-related smoke incidents and peaks. And we get rather high. We've been higher than that before. But that just shows you that wildfire smoke is a major contributor to our emissions in the area. But 22% of the days over moderate were in the winter months when there's a lot of wood stove use and backyard burning use. So you got to be aware of all the timing of your smoke in your area. So some of the strategies are developed by governments. EPA and Washington State have put out some really good material lately. They're updating their Guide for Public Health officials. Looks like Oregon probably did the same thing. SmokeSense app, I'm looking for some really good data from that coming up. And the Washington State Air Quality Advisory just updated their infographic. So that provides people with a lot of basic information on smoke and helps awareness of emissions in our air for the population. And then there's actions and strategies by programs like mine. I maintain my monitoring network, usually better than that picture shows. I'll do some indoor sampling during wildfire smoke, but mainly just get prepared ahead of time so I'm not rushing around trying to reinvent everything as we go. Preparing fact sheets for air resource advisors also helps. And that's just for wildfire smoke. But being smoke ready includes economics, and this is a subject I'm just becoming aware of. Tourism is greatly affected by smoke in all over the Western United States, especially communities that rely on that. So if you got a lot of smoke in the air, whether it's from wildfire smoke or other sources, your tourism goes way down because people look. So there's also lost recreation and opportunities for local people and people coming in there for hiking or bike trips or fishing. And just heard last week on NPR about smoky taste to some wines that are being produced because the grapes were had a lot of smoke during the summer. And generally there's just a decrease in business because even locally when people just don't want to go outside to go shopping because it's too smoky outside. Also, the healthcare industry needs to prepare and develop strategies for smoke because we know it's going to happen. Primary care providers will probably see an increase in visits. Mental health people, like we heard before, smoke and fire creates a huge mental health issues as we're just now starting to understand a little bit. And of course, our at-risk population, convalescent centers and assisted care facilities also need to be taken care of with different kinds of strategies. But the individuals can really come up with strategies to help protect their own health. Using the N95 masks during appropriate times and wearing it appropriately really helps people when you're outside for light duty work. Managing your buildings for smoke intrusion is also a big one. How to use your doors, which doors to use just to keep smoke out of your buildings. And just coming up with strategies for communities and individuals to stop burning outdoors, your yard debris and any waste management that way. Replacing old wood stoves with new wood stoves or just replacing it with a duct or ductless air conditioning heating units would be a wonderful way to decrease our smoke. But mainly we just want to make sure everybody is aware of air quality issues in the area and the timing of those. So one thing, a couple things that individuals can really do is get some manufactured air cleaners and put those in their house for wildfire season and also wood heating season if you have a wood stove. That's probably the best investment you can make in your health for air quality and smoke-related issues. There's a lot of interest in the box fan air filter, do-it-yourself cleaners, and you just make sure you put those together correctly with a good configuration. This slide shows a two-filter hooked to the back of a box fan, not really tight, so you get some makeup air going through there. And recently I became aware of, oh, you have vehicle cabin filters in your vehicles. They're in your air conditioned heating unit, and they need changing every once in a while in order to get the smoke out of the air when you're driving. Also, your heating, cooling filters in your home are very important to watch and make sure they're up to date and clean. So part of what we've been doing in our area is we developed the Okanagan River Airshed Partnership to deal with smoke that is not related to wildfires. On the left there is a community chipping day where community members brought in their brush and tree trimmings and it's got it chipped and then given back to the community for use. The middle photo is a cleanup day for OMAC. We collected lots of tons of vegetation waste and for community members just to beautify the area. And then on the right, there's the first grade Virginia Granger School in Okanagan, Vermiculture Vanguard, they called themselves. Their motto was make compost, not smoke. And they won the EPA's Presidential Environmental Award this year. Had some of them took a trip back to Washington, D.C. to receive that award. So in summary, wildfire smoke is the largest air quality health concern in much of the western United States. Community-based strategies to prepare for all sources of smoke are necessary, not just for wildfire smoke. We want to decrease our yearly exposure. All forms of government programs, organizations need to devise strategy in order for our communities to survive and thrive. Individuals can take the most steps to protect their own health, and then you need to know what your yearly smoke exposure are and what your sources are, and those are very important things. So thank you for listening to this as a quick introduction to a big concept. So I hope you're all interested in smoke-ready communities and how you can do that. And then the last slide just will give you some resources that I put together. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Chris. So we have plenty of time here at the end to go through some questions. So if you have a question, you can type them into the chat box so that everyone can see, or you can type them in the question box. Either way is fine. So first question here is for you, Chris. How do you regulate outdoor burning at the community level, like people burning trash and yard vegetation?
We're approaching that through education and outreach, just to make people aware that when they burn their leaf pile, which is, people start burning their leaves the first sunny day after it rains, and that the smoke goes up a couple hundred feet, travels over a couple blocks, and then descends on their neighbors, which doesn't help their neighbors' health any. Also, it inundates the whole valley sometimes in our area when there's local inversion. So we're addressing that through education outreach, plus providing alternatives to disposal that don't include burning, like the chipping operation. OMAC Okanagan communities have leaf pickup days that are free to the residents there. And we've been working with them and all our partners in the partnership group to increase those days and make alternatives available.
All right, thank you. The next question, I think this might be either for Emily or Chris. Do we know the record number of days in a year in the Pacific Northwest that we've had air quality in the range of unhealthy for sensitive groups or worse?
This is Emily. I'm not certain of the record, but that's something I'd like to know. So I would like to get back to whoever asked the question. And I did note that on average, we're seeing 20 a year, but I don't think that 20 is the record. I think it's been above that. Yeah.
Okay, Emily, we'll put you in contact with the person who asked the question.
Okay. This is Chris. Great. The AQI, is a 24-hour average. And so, all the messaging is for the 24 hours average time period. But when we have 6 or 7 hours of unhealthy or very unhealthy or hazardous air during the day, that can have a long-term health effect on you also. And so the messaging has to be divided from chronic and acute. So acute is the short term, you got a couple days of bad air, but the chronic is when we get into 16 days of hazardous air or unhealthy air in your area. So that'll make a difference too in how you message people.
Thank you. Any other questions? Britt or Holly, were there any questions coming your way?
No, I didn't see any. I will address one of the questions that came through just for everyone, the chat box, which was, can we get the web links to a lot of the tools and products that were shown? And I can certainly provide those for this webinar, but it is something that I will ask future presenters, especially the first two presentations, to just include a web address for all the products we're showing so that you can also go back and access them post-webinar. So I will make that request moving forward. Thank you for that feedback.
In the chat box, I added a recent publication showing that smoke from wildfires has a cooling effect on water streams, since we've been chatting about smoke this session.
Okay, well, seeing no other questions, it looks like we can give you all 10 minutes of your hour this time. So thank you all for joining, and you can follow up with the speakers or with myself or Britt with any other questions you might have. And please tune in for the next webinar on December 17th.
Great, thank you everyone.
Yeah, thank you.